God, great, that's my question. It's really weird that someone for outside. There's a that's why I stood up so I felt like I was getting off the path and get everything signed. There's the agenda, the site. Yep. Hi Stacy, how are you? Oh, and then the science. I heard it say. It already started, so I did not. Good to let people know.
And then I figured out how to make it.
Jason, did you want to sign it or not? Okay. Everybody's good? Everybody's good, here's one for you. How was Yes. There's an agenda.
Oh, geez. I thought $2 Mario. That's what's happening. Pretty glad they got to sit down. The order, first thing I want to make now, this, all this. For Alzheimer's. It's good to get help. One more, how the contract, and the
Charles Anderson for Secret group. Born and raised here in Hayward. Construction industry and happy to do that. Sure. So I think you ran a little bit of a brief here about some of the job summarizing. So for those that don't know, like tell us some of the more than 7 years working on the public permit. That's public social. So again, happy to be back. We of course don't have that to work with the community school district on that project through a very similar process. And again, happy to have the opportunity to work with you folks as well, hopefully to bring whatever form of a project may come to that, but at least starting out with the facility condition assessment, which will be
Yeah, so I get the privilege of working with the Phillips brothers. So Hayward, born and raised. And I think I am from the East Coast, so you have to. I kind of go with them. So yeah, they offset me. So, thankfully, I've been doing stuff here, kind of really assessment director. Board, municipality, state,
So beginning of the presentation, that's fine. Just as Tim mentioned, the work that we do, school districts, So this is kind of a quick recap by you. Where what have you guys already completed and how do we again summary level back in a lot of the let's say pre done at that point then a full estimate assessment was back in that. So there was some discussion in the years, but open March and in July, and requested whether modeling for conversation on a new fire hall, city hall, local options eventually it came to a point where we were invited to speak with all of you guys and I met with the town board of Christ. Ultimately, in our issue, we were left along with others, were selected as an interview and the thing that I'd like to hit on the bottom of the project page is I understand the wording on the bottom is hard to read, but ultimately this whole process, and Dustin alluded to some of this in his earlier comments, it's really a 6-step process, all the way from planning through referendum, building community support for the project, similar to again what you guys seen, similar process what we did with pre-construction, bid award, construction, and post-construction. So the agreements that we set forth and that we discussed both in our interview and we provided you very earlier, there's the contract document that was discussed. The importance of having a holistic contract document if you are to move from point 1 to point 6, the most efficient way to do that as a town, both from a perspective as well as from But the information or design. So for example, if we come in here and use, ultimately, or this a great point on this project plan development. Because there's so overlap, already we want to go through. I know, there are there's a in terms of the FDA, and I know it's going to right, all provide support. All the yes, like yes, building water more active adequacy of those. But then there's also another part of that which is okay, outside of the existing building, similar to what Legend has done for the board in the past, what are the other potential options, ideas that we might want to incorporate into a project? That's high level when we refer to the block diagram. So folks, very well. I think that I know we're getting a little bit. There is drywall. It's, yeah, this was telling us decided that that's what board, you go in and start selecting for the design. At that point, then they're able to start designing all 25. The reason why I say that is important to keep in mind, because if you find yourself landing in July or August on that bottom page, it means you've got one of two options. You can either try to speed things up so that if you do have a project, you're not trying to start it in the middle of winter, or that you look at it and you just know what you're finding cost-wise for a project that starts in 2022. The only reason I you only have one. That I know that for the
Yes. Really established stuff. So we have to start out by looking at we've done a lot of good things. We're going to be in our so we're really gathering that. Started buying then we do this collection. So we actually collect folks sitting here and operate the facility. I want to pay for it also for really have a great after basically hey, here's the parking lot, go away all the way up to the I want the all of this ourselves on the south. You'll get a link to the report. And so we get all these door knobs back. This is information now. It's going to take back to doing it. We're taking all these identified we're prioritizing, setting up costs we're gonna be, all of that diligence, all of this, all of that. At old school, I worked in the old study. So it is, why do I tell you this is the category? Well, that was for prioritizing. That gives us that time to collaborate. You guys are looking across. Really, that kind of that back and forth. We think this would be done, then first when we put that out, really come up with that roadmap. So we'll do that collaboration, and then we'll start putting together the story of what we found for this facility, which is great because we can post this, everybody can read it, present that information, that story, what's going on. So we work on the IFMA method of doing facility international well recognized committee. The K has a little bit of a twist on it because of some of the stuff that's different. It's a little bit different. We actually soften the scale for when you actually say when a building beyond its life. I actually soften that with the terminology we use because when you tell somebody that it takes 22% of your building cost to replace it, and you're calling that a floor building, so we're like, okay, let's call that fair. Okay, how about we call that a fair building? So we worked with that system, but it helps tell that story of where you're at and give everybody the comfortable due diligence that you know where the costs are coming from. Okay, this is not so we are not, but we actually what is really let the numbers do the top. We don't come up with a strategy. We do look at this as a lifetime of the I really what is it?
And there's some items that might
Not quite yet. We're literally putting our blinders on the building as is. So yeah, yeah. That's the yeah, exactly. That's the analysis. That's what actually surprises the yeah, you kind of see on that bottom rung there. So we'll add up all those different things. But really, we're talking replace, refurbish, upgrade, determine what should happen, prioritize it, redefining, or status. This establishes what I call it. You guys do nothing. Here's what you got. You got a tool going forward, man. Whether you do anything or else, the rest of the time, we now have a tool.
That's what we said, okay, is that knowing that cost, it's not being done with the cost of your equipment. It's our experience in the street, once that goes out on the street and gets priced, what the market's going to tell you that cost. And I think what I hit on just quickly in terms of how we come to those costs, so we have a robust database, internal across Anderson, it's called Modelogics, and what that does is for all of our past projects, or the majority of our past projects, we dump in information for other fire departments, police stations, city halls, town halls, you name it, it all goes in there. And then we have the ability to select like projects or similar projects to what this would be. And what Modelogics does is two things. It geolocates and time locates or inflation adjusts the cost of each of those projects to what does it cost in Hayward, right? It's a very similar tool to what we use to set the budgets, again, just because of the familiarity back at the high school project, excuse me. And so with those costs, the other benefit I would say, right, is we have 30 plus contractors in each of those jobs that we've worked with now over the past couple of years. So not only do we have the back history of other projects in other geographic areas, but we also have the benefit of the projects a couple miles down the road that we've been out over the last couple of years to pull in recent cost data to corroborate, which it does, to corroborate the data that we had previously before we did anything to say this is the true value. So,
but I just finished a facility condition assessment for a Catholic church in St. Paul, Minnesota, and they get donations of labor and and materials and stuff like that. So we took our facility condition assessment, we modified the numbers for those donations, and we actually did this at Bemidji's Boys and Girls Club as well, where they're getting donations of labor and stuff. So we're able to modify those costs according to what you guys can accomplish, whether it be through local contractors or local staff or however you do it. Sometimes we do public works facilities and they're like, we'll pave our own parking lot. Wonderful. Let's add that cost. So it's really nice to have that ability to really give it true up cost when we work through that cost, and everything's transparent, everything's out there, everybody can see it. Then once we get done with that, then you really start thinking about, okay, let's talk about space planning. Let's talk about adequacy planning, because that is another cost that you have to take into account when you're making your decision. And that is really the next step to the facility assessment and this whole process.
And I know, Mike, I think we've got about 5 minutes here before we want to open it up for questions, but it's a lot of information, right? I think that if you have contacts at the school, I think they're going to be very helpful because they've lived through this with us. It's an incredible amount of detail, and we put that detail out there because there are certain folks within the public, and it should be open to anybody that wants to see it, to dive into the weeds. That report that Tim's talking about, that detailed report, when we come into this facility, it's likely, the district one was hundreds of 800, 900 pages. This one might be in the hundreds of pages as well. But that detail is out there that backs up, but we also bring it up to an executive summary to say, here is the greatest hits of it. You may not care about that doorknob and the condition of that doors and if it needs to get replaced. You do. But folks may care about, and I'll just take this for an instance, when we did our community open houses for the school district, there's a gentleman that was really into it. He was like, yep, okay, holy man, I didn't see the conditions of these doors behind the school. I guess I've never been back there before. I guess those need to get replaced. But then there are other folks in the crowd that when we give our presentation of okay, here were the findings from the facility, they're like, wow, I didn't know that at the primary school, hot water wasn't getting half the building because the pipes were still going on, maybe just couldn't get through, right? So there are some folks that could care less about the doors, care more about this. We summarize it both ways, because if you're an individual that likes the detail, by all means, you paid for the detail, you might as well share it, let folks dive in as far as they want to go. But we're also rolling that up so somebody doesn't feel like they have to read 250 pages to get the story of what's gone into the facility if they don't have the time to.
So then there's you have a summary of
Absolutely.
Yeah.
areas that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
We
then-
gotta
We call it the greatest hits tour of your facility, so.
We've got to make it useful. So we try to get both ends of it because you can't just do one or the other because without that, people take information differently. So.
And that information would be available like online.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have it on an online portal, and then we can share that with you guys, and then we can display it however we want. Everybody can dig into it.
And can you drill down from your summary page?
Yep.
Can you directly drill down into the detail?
You can get lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would reiterate, I know in the interest of time, so you let us know if you want me to kind of buzz the.
Oh, take your time.
Okay.
I don't think any of you guys are in the.
We're fine. I don't have a
think
time
this is
constraint, so,
Really, really interesting, so.
yeah.
Take your time.
So what I was gonna say, and Dustin mentioned the 900 page report, but we went through that report, I would say, without exaggerating, 5 or 6 times as we worked through the process with the school. And each one of those was probably it was a 3-hour meeting where we sat through and went line item by line item in Excel for hundreds of lines to go through and say, because the Tim's comment earlier about we assign it a year, you do that in part by assigning it a priority. Is it something that needs to be done in 0 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7, 7 to 10? It's that 10-year roadmap. And so priorities may change. We'll set it initially, and then we'll have a conversation, and depending upon how it moves forward, and that's the different iterations of what ultimately became the projects for the school system. There were multiple iterations of what's in the quote unquote referendum or the project, and what maybe is an item that we'll kick out and do it post KA because we can manage it on our own. And so that's a livable document that we work with you guys on. This next slide, there's a lot of information on it. I guess I'll just summarize it. So this is actually, I've had an opportunity, not only in my original hometown, but what I refer to now as my adopted hometown. So I live in Chisago City, Minnesota, located on Highway about 45 miles west of Turtle Lake. This is an example of an overall budget. And I guess what I'd like to hit on this, and again, if you have questions, please let me know. It really breaks down into 3 general areas. So at the top, you can see revenue above the green line. That's total revenue. So what are the different dollars potentially as we work to put together a budget for you guys? And this is really moving out of phase 1, but to Dustin's point of keeping the end in mind. I just want you to understand how we look at costs. So number 1, what is the potential budget? We don't need to know that number right away. It is nice to at least define a budget so that as we work towards a potential project though, we know what potential constraints there are that we need to fit within. Again, that comes into context of prioritizing those needs. The second section is what we refer to as construction costs. So what are construction costs? That could be renovation costs. That could be new building costs. Those are the 2 typical ones that I would give you in a project as we're working through. And again, this is like phase 2, 3 down the road for some of this, but there's design contingency. So depending upon what stage of design you're in, at a high level, there's multiple stages, but concept design, schematic design, design development, construction, none of that matters. But at different stages, there's a standard that you carry for a contingency, for things that'll work their way into the drawings as you continue through design. So we carry design contingency. Based on when the project we're going to construct it, as Dustin laid out earlier, see how good my math is, 24 to 25, we would be starting in early 26 or spring of 26, according to the preliminary schedule. We are going to price everything as what it would cost you if you were to go get it tomorrow. But we know that that's not when the project's actually going to happen. We want to show you today's dollars. That's what that roughly that $5 million number is there. That's thank you, Dustin. That's that number, today's dollars. But then we're going to give the escalation to get it to what it's going to cost in 2026. And so that we use like RS means or the Turner Index to look at inflation adjusting to those numbers of what that is. That's an open conversation with you guys, but we'll have some of the experience to bring forth what a true number is for that. That gets you a total bid day cost. And then on any project, there's a contingency dollar amount. So again, that's an industry standard. It's typically 5 to 7.5%. We would have that conversation with you guys to say, how much money do we want to have for the in case stuff comes up, which we all know it does, right? No matter how good your drawings are, coordinated and re-coordinated, and you have all the different disciplines that go through them. The industry standard is roughly 5%, and hopefully the expenditure is somewhere between 2.5% to 3.5% of that dollar value. So that then summarizes the general conditions, not to skip over that. That's the cost to actually do construction. It's a cost of work line item. You need to have some fencing to keep people out, or keep the honest people out anyways. You need to have, temporary toilets. You need to have dumpsters, just the stuff that it takes to run, signage, safety, just the everyday construction costs. And typically it depends on a project.
Temporary heat.
Temporary heat, those kinds of things. Typically, just as a rough ballpark, we'll start at like $15,000 to $20,000 a month, and it may be higher or lower than that depending on certain characteristics. I think the important part is, and where we feel that we can differentiate in our project budgets against some of our competitors, we look at the budget holistically for you guys as an owner. We're not worried about just what our cost is, or the quote unquote above the line construction cost. We include soft costs. So what are soft costs? Soft costs to an owner, I know again it's hard to see, so I'll just read it for some of those two that are listening in the back. Those are design costs. So if an AE firm's brought on, what are their costs? That includes people time. So what does it cost for the project manager and the superintendent to be on site? To your point earlier, Andrea, what are the permitting costs, right? So we're reaching out to the DNR, we're reaching out to John at the city and saying, hey, what are our permit costs? What do we need to make sure that we have an accurate budget for you guys holistically? What impacts any utilities are on the site that we need to be aware of? Testing and inspection. So making sure that if there is a project, there's special inspections that are completed. Is the ground the right compaction? Right? Because we mentioned sinking floors potentially before that we need to investigate. Making sure that that doesn't happen again by doing compaction testing before slabs are poured. Looking at steel, looking at exterior enclosure items to make sure that not only is KA on site for quality control, but there's an independent second set of eyes that's also looking at each of those building components as it goes in. And then FF&E. So at the end of the day, is there FF&E, I should say, is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Basically, it's anything if you think tip your house or your building upside down, shake it out. The stuff that falls out is typically FF&E. So your chairs, your desks, your tables, those kinds of things. Are there going to be reused from the existing facility to be brought in? I'm sure there is. Is there going to be new stuff that would want to be purchased for a facility like that? Yep, there probably is. And so we work to bring in all of those costs as well. So then you get to a bottom grade number of total project cost, which is not only everything in construction, but also all of the soft costs that I just mentioned before. So you're not potentially short-sighting or short funding the project. You've got the entire bucket of costs.
I'll say this is extremely helpful. One of the first projects we showed on our front cover page was the Village of Baldwin. We just wrapped up their EMS facility. When we first started this process with them several years back now, they were looking at a fire, PD, and village hall potentially getting relocated all together. We've done some studies prior to coming on board, no differently than you have in years prior. And they kind of were house divided on several. We're sitting at, we should only do fire, only do PD, only do the village hall. What do we want to do? And ultimately, where it landed for them is looking at all these different options, looking at what their needs were at their current facilities, looking at these different options. But what really brought them together was when you take these options, and there can be plenty of them. You can see 4 on here. I think at the Village of Baldwin, there were somewhere around 6. But when you work these back and you start working with your finance provider on what are those tax impacts, that's what really brought the group together, because at the end of the day, it's really that what's that impact to the community, and what is this being phased over time? What is that ask? That's incredibly important and extremely helpful for you in order to make an informed decision, right? So it's not uncommon to go back to finance, whoever you work with on your finance side, and say, okay, let's run these 4 different options through 2 different funding scenarios and see which funding scenario makes the most sense, and what are those different tax impacts. And then if you realize here's a threshold for what you're willing to do for a tax impact, then you reverse engineer it and come up with how can you live within your budget, what can you get done within your budget, right? And that may be going back and relooking at the facility condition assessment for a 3rd or 4th time, maybe going back and retuning these costs. So we may get through this only to come back and revisit it, depending upon what you find when you start working on the finance side to figure out how you'd actually fund the project. You can see in this scenario, we're already doing a little bit in this blue option. You'll notice that they started at 18,700 square feet. But as they were pricing out and figuring out what was allowable to them, we were looking at pre-engineered metal buildings. We were looking at precast buildings. They went away and said, we're not going to do a pre-engineered building. We want to do a precast. That's a commitment. To go to an all precast facility was a little bit more expensive for them. The only way they could do that was look at ways they could shave down on their square footage, which means they lost out on some of the amenities that they would have liked to have had. But we're looking at saying, okay, we're going to fund those potentially down the road in the future. We know this is what we need. This is what we want to move forward with. So
So a couple of things about that process that's really good is this allows you to really right size the facility for what you guys really need. And it eliminates this, what I call the arches and porticos that architects like to put on drawings that really just add unnecessary cost, okay? We want to really focus on a target value design dollar amount that's right for the town and right for the tax threshold that you guys can bear. And so by us getting into this engagement of space planning and adequacy and then right sizing the facility, that allows you to really understand what your threshold is, so then we can start working these options. We paint very tight guardrails then for the architect to live within. And you cannot build that arch or that portico, without express permission from the town that says, yeah, we want an arch there. Okay, great. Okay, now we can add an arch, but not until then. So that's the goal of this exercise.
In fairness, and Dustin hit on it too, but just in fairness to the full board, because we did say this during our interview, Dustin touched on it briefly to say that you see that there's 3 different options out there, right? Ultimately, there was 4, but one of them's hit. So you can see the first column in purple. That is the original budget that the Lakes Area Police Commission, or on behalf of the Lakes Area Police Department, had said, hey, how do we get a project, or what can we get for a project for $8 million? And at a very simplistic level, when you look at a construction project, roughly 75 to 80% of your costs are hard construction costs, and 20 to 25% of your costs are sunk costs. That's just how it breaks out. You can look at any construction project, and those are the numbers. And so the big thing that this budget component is, it really helps tell the story and pair with the FCA and some of the information Tim shared before, because we can look at and looking at the drawings that Legend has, for whatever reason, and probably a very good reason, a decision was made to move in a pre-engineered metal building. And that probably is, or most likely could be, the best option moving forward, but it may not be. And so part of this, as you can see on the screen, we started, it was an $8 million budget, and they said, well, hey, why don't you price? And there was an architect in this case that was on board in advance of K, and they had done a similar facility study, and they said, well, price what's in this facility needs assessment. And we did. And the numbers came in at $9.7 million and $10 million.
You're throwing numbers out. I just want to make sure that we all understand and all on the same page. Those numbers.
This is just an example.
They are just
Yep, this
examples.
is just.
Our numbers will come in after you've done your facility.
Thank you for saying, yes, again, this is just an example. And so to Dustin's point, the conversation as we moved through subsequent meetings was, okay, well, $9.7 million and $10 million from the facility needs assessment, like, that's just not even a viable project for us. We do want to move forward, but our budget is a hard $8 million. How do we get there? And so then you start having conversations, whether it's through the FCA deferred maintenance or the adequacy planning, to say, okay, what cuts can be lived with for now, and how do we shave and modify the plan to get there? So.
Then we talked about engaging community. We provided some examples when we came in to do the interview of the school district. Anybody that can get access to the Hayward Community School District's website can literally click on it for construction updates. It's got a timeline going all the way back, even though we're going into kind of the final stretches of that referendum for them and building their facilities. You can still go on their website today and go right back to the dot study that Tim did on the doors for each of those individual facilities. So we ultimately look at building something similar to that with you. We had our person in-house just kind of rough something out right off the get-go, but this has to be tailored to work for the town. So coming up with what are the goals for the project, and it might take getting through the facility condition assessment and some of the master planning to develop those goals. What's the ultimate outcome that the town is looking for? What are those guiding principles that's leading on decision making of when you go into it? It's good to know on our end, and it's probably be extremely helpful on the town's end to know what those guiding principles are as making decisions. What do you want out of not only the study, but ultimately the project if something happens? What do you want for this site in the end? It's something that we can come back to. We can tie those studies, not only the prior studies, which we just threw up here from the ones that we could find on the town site. We threw those in here telling the storyline of all the work that's been done to date. And then you can use this for here's what's coming, right? So we can link this right onto the town's website page. We update this with you on a monthly basis. Say, hey, or if we have something coming up, like, hey, we'd like to have an open house. We just got the facility condition assessment done. We're going to be doing the executive summary tonight at the town board meeting. Everybody, please come that's interested in hearing about what came out of the facility condition assessment. So it's a really nice spot to get the message out. We tailor this to you. So this is just something that we did in a vacuum prior to coming here. But it's something we started working on this with you in conjunction with the facility assessment, because the communication piece, while it seems like it can take a long time to get up and running, it's really not. But we need to have those initial meetings and get that framework outlined.
A key component that I would add that we talked to again at the interview process, but probably the most hit link, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we can see the data then behind it with what's getting the most access or the most views. But one of the top hit components of the one for the school district was a frequently asked questions page. So for you guys as board members, town board members, if you guys are getting questions from the public, which I'm assuming that you are, as you field those questions, there's a process by which then we can incorporate those questions into an FAQ that's available on here for consistent messaging. There's nothing I would say from your side or from our side that we're looking to hide or keep underneath the rug. All of the information, especially at a meeting such as this, is public information. So to be able to have that avenue for people to access it and to have a consistent message for an FAQ where people can go out, that was extremely beneficial. And not only on the project that we did most recently in town, but on other projects that we've done in the past for other municipalities, cities, towns, the village of Baldwin. It's a very beneficial tool or resource, not only to you guys as board members, but to the community at large, so that they can read. If one person has the question, there's probably 10 others that have the same question.
Constant ears on the ground. We can hear it through Facebook pages, community engagement meetings. When we have the open houses for the school district, we probably come out of there with a handful of questions that we bring back to our next meeting. Like, okay, we heard this. This is something that we need to get out there and respond to. Usually it was, and we could get those items addressed and address them either at the next meeting that we have for community engagement, or get it out on the website for frequently asked questions.
And I know Dustin hit this, but just to reiterate, the link, if and when you guys chose to proceed with something like this, it could be posted. New content would not go through until we've all agreed as a group that it's content that can be posted. It's not like we're just running our own show on the side and putting whatever content we want out there. We're not doing that. So
Is there an opportunity for the public to post questions on that website?
that's a good question.
We normally do a link, so we'll assign somebody from the facility committee, whoever that would like to be, an email to say, or if it's a standard town email of saying, out there on that website, if you have a question, please submit it to this email, and then we talk about it at our meeting. Say, hey, we got 5 emails. Usually in any given scenario, there's maybe 5 to 10 questions that are pretty standard that you keep getting that you'll want to make your question sheet respond to.
And I'd just like to mention for the facility plan and the 2 new board members that, we couldn't discuss before because it was closed session, but what you guys heard tonight is just about what we were listening to in the interview process. But I would consider everyone up to speed now. You guys all heard basically some of the same slides that they presented to the interview committee, which was closed session, which we couldn't talk about, but now we're in open. So
Same jokes too.
yeah.
Still, I
About you and where you're from.
it'll
yeah.
So with that, we're at the end kind of the presentation deck. As Gary mentioned, some of the very similar slides, identical slides actually that we used in the interview process. We'd be happy to entertain any additional questions that you guys have now.
The comment that Gary made is important too. There's 2 new board members. There's a new facility chairman. We had people resign. Gary is now resigning. So we have a lot of changes that are going on. And I think out of respect for you and for us too, kind of, for me, I'd like to I have to drink all this in, and this is my first Kool-Aid, my first, drink at the trough, let's say. So I have a lot of information that is floating around in my brain that I was not privy to at any time other than tonight. So I think out of fairness, you know, they went through the process of actually choosing you, and now we have all these new people involved. And we didn't even get to listen to the other people, that the other three, you know, so I guess I'd like to have a little bit of time to like breathe this all in, and, you know, Carol's new to it too. I mean, Andy and Gary are gonna be basically the only two, because John McHugh only was at one facility planning committee meeting before he came and watched the RFPs or, you know, your presentation. So he's not even aware of what was discussed previously in the facility committee. So there's just so many moving parts that are moving right now. So I, you know, and out of respect for you, I mean, I listened to you back in December too, but I didn't get to hear anybody else say anything. So I really don't have anything to compare you to, because I wasn't in on that opportunity, so.
Unfortunately, that's the process though, Brenda. The decision was made by the facility plan committee and the town board to have 3 board members and 2 facility, and we made the selection of this based on that. So unfortunately, no, you weren't privy to that information. You didn't get to hear from the other 3, but that was the process. You weren't a member
No,
of
and
the
I like.
facility. So that's why it happened as it did. It was not disrespectful, but everything has a process, and that's the process we follow. And we got to stick with process as you guys continue forward. I'll be gone, but I wish I was here, but I don't want to be. But someone's got to continue the process, because you just can't have going off on tangents. You have to have clear direction if you're going to be successful in anything.
No, I understand.
And so that's already, what you're talking about, that's already been done and voted on, and we have a contract we're gonna be signing with Kraus Anderson, just to make that clear. That's where we're at.
But what you're trying to get to, Brenda, just what you're trying to accomplish, you want some more time so you can get through some more of the
Well,
documentation?
there's a lot to look through for me and to compare.
So is it the timeline that you're concerned about right now?
Well, I mean, I listened to them speak in December, and I was impressed then, and I am now, and I'm just saying that I realize that this is a decision that was made by a group of 5 people. But 2 of those people are gone, or gonna be gone.
That's a material,
So,
you can't operate like that. You could go up to county board and say the same thing. So that's really not even worth merit to discuss that, Brenda.
but
This is the way the process was set up. This is where we're at. We move forward from this. You're now a board member. If you want to interject things down the road, that's fine. But that was already done. You can look at your documents, research and whatever. But that train's already left the station. We're doing a facility cost or condition analysis. Kraus Anderson is going to complete that analysis.
and we talked about.
I guess I don't understand your point. And I think Gabrielle was a little confused too. What do you need more time for?
I'm just saying that this is a lot to take in all at one
Absolutely,
time.
it's a lot to take in. It was a lot for the board to take in. We listened to 4 consultants over 4 hours.
Right.
There was a lot of due diligence put into this process. And I came home, I told my wife, I said, mark my words, I put all this time with it. Somebody will find fault in it. Somebody will find fault in what was done.
Could we get a printed copy of page 4? It was that time.
You can have the whole slide deck. Yeah, you can.
But I think if we had that,
Right.
because do we want to set up another meeting then?
I think
Is
following this, yes. We wanted to make sure if there were questions or items that came up tonight that we'd address them. We ultimately, I think right now the schedule is assuming that we're able to get contracts wrapped up here in the next 3 weeks. I think it is. If that's the case, we're still looking at getting started next month. And to that point, I wanted to bring this slide back up and just to reiterate that exact point that you were making. Right now, as it stands, the next time we would meet would likely be mid-May. And we'd work out that schedule with you, start lining up those meetings. But the reality is, to Tim's point, we have to come here and do the facility condition assessment, which you certainly walk alongside us, but there's not a whole lot you're going to need. We're gonna have a team of individuals on their phones taking pictures, entering data information, looking at labels on air handling units or furnaces or whatever the case may be. Walking around the facility, just collecting data. Then we have to process that data and bring it back to you. I would honestly say the first meeting we're likely gonna have with the facility committee, other than the kickoff, which we'd love to have as many people there as we want, which is kind of review the facility, people who are knowledgeable about this building. We'd like to collect that information first before we just start running around the site, taking pictures and photographs and documenting information, because you have a wealth of information in this facility. But then talking about that communication, sitting down with the facilities committee and saying, okay, what are our guiding principles, our goals, what do we want out of this? What are the question marks that we take away? So we can really start developing that communication strategy. Because there's not a lot that's gonna happen before probably even me.
I'd just like to interject that we've, as you pointed out before, this is all of the information we've been collecting since 2018.
2018, yeah, 20.
So we've done some of the groundwork, and you're going to review that
Mhm.
and come to your own, again, through a process, come to a conclusion on all of this.
Mhm.
And those of us who have been with this project all this period of time, we're real aware of this, but as Brenda did point out, there are people here that are not aware of what's going on.
Mhm.
And that's because they weren't here for all of these years. So when we meet in the middle of May, you said?
Yep.
Then we'll have time to go through some of these. We have done studies with our department heads, but you're going to renew that process, correct?
The one comment I'd make quick is, that looks like a pretty thick binder,
It's happening,
and I printed out everything that we have, and it's probably not quite a fit of that.
yeah.
So if there is additional information that we don't have,
Well, this is also includes all of the meeting minutes.
oh, okay, so yeah, if
Yeah.
you went back to the last slide, there was the kind of those
Yeah.
3 touch points. We have the 3 different touch points, and we have all that information. So when I looked at that, I'm like, oh, there might be another like 200 pages we don't have. Which is fine, but if there was additional information, we'd certainly love to have it, but we do have what has been shared today. So that is, if that's everything, we have.
So I have a question for Tim. Tim, who would be doing the bore studies then, doing the boring to test the soils? Because that's an additional cost.
Yeah, go for it.
So, yep, so what we have in here is when we analyze and look at your slabs, we talked about this during our interview process. So you're gonna want to be very pointed about where you go searching for, like soil boards, because they get extremely costly. You have to hire a testing agency to come in and do those. So we know from looking at, like, if you have pointed issues in your slab, maybe they're around where a pipe is. If you have as-built drawings, we're gonna look at all of that and say, okay, here's where we believe the problem is, and we're gonna put a dollar value to solving that problem. The time at which you do soil borings or subsurface exploration, it's gonna be at the time you want to bring a design team on board. The reason being is, for a site like this, you may have anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 tied up in soil borings. Because you want to be very pointed about where you're doing. You just don't want to start plugging and making the site Swiss cheese. But if you're like, yep, this is the building layout, we're really satisfied with how this looks, what you need a design team on board for. At that point in time, you're going to say, yep, here's where the foundations are going and the slab on grade's going. I want 6 borings at these locations, and the design team is usually the one that says, here's where I want them, here's the depth I want them at, and then you get a report back. So there's like three entities in this area that'll do soil borings, and we'd solicit proposals from them on your behalf to say, here's what we need. But we wouldn't let your design team dictate that, because those are the folks that know what they need
That
in order
makes
to make
sense.
sure you're building.
In fairness, again, we just to bring it to reality, so we were talking about, and someone made a comment, I'm not sure who it was, but about the settling slabs and the blind that went up right at the beginning, right? So, so to Dustin's point, and we actually did this again just across town over at the school, actually in the middle school. So the middle school used to have an old sawdust pit, right? They would dump the sawdust in, they feed it up into the boiler system, the whole 9 yards, right? They had a similar issue in what is currently an IT storage. It'll eventually be part of the expanded band room at the middle school, where that slab had shown some crack. And so to Dustin's point, once you bring the design team on, over there was proposals solicited, and one of the firms was Braun Intertech. So they came out and they actually x-rayed the floor in that area and found that it was less than a quarter, most likely like an 1/8 inch separation between sand and slab, right? So instead of being in contact like it should be, there was an 1/8 inch gap. There were some reasons for that. But ultimately, what was originally thought to be carried in the design drawings was we got to build this 8-inch slab and re-pour this whole thing back. It's $30,000. That GPR happened to be a $1,700 scan, which I know sounds expensive, but it saved that slab and translated into like a $25,000 or $3,000 cost to fix it. So it ended up saving the project $25,000+ in cost. So the Dustin's point about being pointed, if we notice deficiencies, yes, 100%, we're gonna document what those are and we'll assign a value to them. And then if and when the decision is ever made to progress into or further into a project, that's when we start to bring in some of those other folks.
It's very much a crawl, walk, run type mentality. Let's not jump to conclusions and just start boring and
Hammer and pulling the building
Yeah.
apart and.
So we
That
want to,
makes- I was just told that the boring is a separate cost and that that it may happen like
Yeah,
now in this assessment process. And I was thinking, we don't really know where.
No.
back to the overall project.
Yeah.
Whatever, so that's why. I was-
this is later in the process.
Back to that overall budget standpoint, yes, that does get created in early on. The pricing component of it, and I call it a budget, but that doesn't necessarily mean just because you have a budget, it's gonna translate into a project. But we wanna start thinking holistically, part of it, like I mentioned, the soft costs before, that testing and inspections just contractually, state of Wisconsin, state of Minnesota. That's something that the legalese language, which I'm not an attorney, it can't reside underneath a Carlos Anderson umbrella. So that's what I termed soft costs earlier. That's one of those soft costs that we would help budget and track and monitor on behalf of the town if and when it proceeds to that stage. But we're not quite there yet, but appreciate the question.
That makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
You're talking about, like happy versus minutes from meetings and that, I just talked to Bryn, I'm not sure if you've had the facility committee, we met with each department and went over what their needs were in that. I know you didn't want that right away. I think.
No, we'll be happy to take
Okay, I
it.
know.
We don't have it, but we'd love to have it.
So
that's-
she'll make sure you get that. 'Cause
Sure.
we went over and it was mostly pretty much all
Mhm.
safety and efficiency.
Yep.
It's like they weren't
Yeah.
asking for, a Cadillac,
The more information, the better.
Well, ultimately to Dustin, that's the guiding principles, right? When you think back to kind of the three again for this, we want to develop those with your guys' input to lead the conversation.
And then your facility assessment, then that will be done mid-May? Or
No, that's when we'll start the process. Yeah.
So in fairness to Gary, the contract, there was, I think, 4 in the email that I had sent to you this morning, Gary, there's 4 different documents in there. And that's kind of the holistic picture, right, of steps 1 through 6, but we're only on step 1. So you want to set up, not to go too deep in the weeds here, but you want to set up, for the type of contract model that we had talked about before, it's what they call a C-132 or AA-132. And quickly, that's a family of contracts. And so if you are to move forward, the C-132 is our agreement between us and you guys as the owner of the town. The parallel agreement to that, if it were to move to a construction project, is what they call the A-132. That would be between you guys and eventually prime contractors that are competitively bid out. We share the proposals or the bids, and then, maybe they're opened in a public setting. They are required to be, whether it's virtual or in person. And then we do our whole post-bid review award, the whole 9 yards, right? So then there's that contract, and then there's what they call the A-232, which is the general conditions. That's like the rules or the parents of the fight between 2 siblings of how does the A-132 and the C-132 act? So as I said, a family of documents. So you're thinking, well, why do I need to look at these other 2 if we're only talking about the C-132 right now for the pre-construction services? And it's important to have the holistic view because, as I mentioned, those contracts speak to each other. So just in the event that it moves forward down the line, it's good to have the attorney look at all those documents because if they make an edit to the C-132, they likely need to make the same edit to the A-132 and the A-232. And I know that's alphabet soup, but it's short for there's a family of documents and you might as well have the attorney look at all of them up front. It's just going to save everybody time and pain down the road.
That's a lot to do.
Fantastic. And if there's questions, I did provide our legal contact in there. Feel free if your attorney wants to reach directly out to him, or I'm happy to be the intermediary between 2 attorneys as well.
So the question I would have is, do we get to see the contracts?
I don't see why not.
I just received them in
Yeah.
our legal, so.
So the only thing that I
I don't
would,
see why there'd be a problem. You
I
couldn't see
mean,
that.
or I know they could be changed, so this would be something
Yeah.
that we
Unless our legal tells us no, because that's why we went to closed session. So maybe legal will say that, hey, that's gotta be closed session.
But
Yeah.
the
I
FCA
don't know.
proposal is exactly what was, how we presented in the RFP, so there's nothing.
And I don't want to supersede your attorney, but typically they're available publicly.
I was just gonna say, my gut feeling is telling me it's gonna be the best.
What I would say though is, because you're gonna see, and it's potentially, not potentially, it's 4 documents, if you see all of them. The ones that matter right now, there's a facility condition assessment proposal. And then there's the C-132. And so it's really signing both of those documents. So in the facility condition assessment proposal, at the end of that, at the end, the fees are broken out into 2 separate components. There's the $6,500 for Tim's doorknob study. And then there's, I was hoping I'd get a little laugh. So there's the $6,500 for the facility condition assessment. And then there's the $5,000 for the pre-construction, the estimating services that kind of pair with that. And so the C-132 is what speaks to in the legalese for the back of the word. That's what speaks to the pre-construction services that we're providing. And so it's the FCA proposal and the C-132 together that bring out that 11,500. And at the end of the FCA, Brennan and Gary, you guys probably already seen it, but in that table on, I think it's the last page or second to last page, the $5,000, it says like in C-130, AIA C-132-2019. It's not an additional cost where it's 11,500 plus the 5, just to clarify. It's 11,500.
And then is the 2% also in there?
That would be,
That's
the only
later on.
time, the 2% would be later on if you decide to go forward with the project. You just know what your contractors, your construction managers charging you down the line. We're taking care of it, so it's not like, oh, we're in with you now and then dictate a 3 or 4%. You've got the CR number competitively against our peers in the industry upfront before selecting us.
But that's down the line.
That's down the line. The 2% doesn't come into play. So you do a construction, until and unless there's a construction project.
Structure.
And you guys had mentioned in December when you came here to get the proposal, like that 2%, that's you like overseeing everything so that things happen timely, so we're not waiting like a month. We don't have months and months delays waiting for this, so everything is coordinated.
We manage everything that happens from owner to design team to
You're
contractor.
essentially, if you look at a general contracting model, like you're just hiring somebody to come build your house, right? You don't really care or know who we hired for the plumber or who we hired for the electrician and who we hired for the framing. That's a general contracting model, but there's still somebody for that general contractor. There's a project manager managing all the paperwork, and there's a superintendent making sure the place is getting built. All you did moving to a construction manager is you took that people cost and that fee percentage and you moved it to a construction manager. That PM, you're getting to see your team in advance of who's managing your project. But now you're gonna get to see who your electrician is, who your plumber is, who your roofer is. So it's just more, it's more open.
Any other questions? Great questions.
No, appreciate you guys coming up. It was very educational.
Thank you for having us.
I'm glad you went over it the way you did, so everyone is now on the same page and got to hear what you guys, how you wowed us.
Well, I appreciate it. If there is, again, feedback that comes from the attorney, whether it gets through Dustin or I, please reach out.
Or you have questions as time goes on, you have our emails, feel free to shoot us some information and we will get back to you.
We can get tonight's slide deck, Gary. I can send that to you probably first thing tomorrow morning
Okay.
at this point.
And you mentioned something in your presentation. Do you want to have a one point of contact on the facility plan? Is that something you were talking about?
Yeah, that's, so we'll do an official kickoff once you guys, agree to the FCA, and then, so we'll do an external, and then at that point, we'll pick a single point of contact. That's just a great flow of information. So we'll hammer all those logistics out in the external kickoff meeting, so.
Would it be wise to have someone from facility or an employee? I was thinking like,
It would be helpful for facilities, I would say, just because then that person, and it's up to the board if it's invited for full board, but we'd like to have meetings with the facilities committee to start talking through, and they might be virtual, they might be in person, mixture of both, depending upon availability of individuals, because we like to get the most. It might be even hybrid, where we're here in person, but some people are attending online. But we'd like to get some of those meetings on the books to start talking through community
okay,
and.
thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Should we wait till the lawyer approves contracts before we set up meetings?
Yeah, I would, we have, so we're gonna, those contracts are being reviewed, they will be being reviewed. With Carol Williamson being elected to the board, we do have a vacancy on our facility plan commission.
We received one.
We received one, we have 2 vacancies, so if anyone is interested in the audience in becoming a member of the facility plan committee, there's a form.
Applications on the back wall.
Their application, yeah, back there, and it sure is nice to have, the citizens' input in getting people along, you know, sitting at this, I attend these meetings, just as an observer in the back, and yeah, it's interesting to see how all these minds get together, and
Thank you again, very much
Yeah,
appreciated.
appreciate it.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I would
Kittle, so it's thin. Yeah.
entertain a motion to
Yeah,
adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We're adjourned at 7:13 PM. Thank you, everyone.
Kittle, okay.
Nice to meet you. I recognize it anyway. Yeah. Nice to see you.